If you pull a worn volume off the shelf of Roman history and open it at the name Caesar, you can almost feel the temperature change. This is one of those lives where everything seems too dramatic to be real. Meteoric rise, breathtaking power, and a death so theatrical that it has echoed for over 2,000 years. But Julius Caesar's story is not just about one man's ambition, it's also about a republic that was already cracking, and how one gifted, dangerous politician learned to slip through those cracks until the whole structure came down around him. Let's walk through his rise and his fall. A republic in trouble. Long before Caesar crossed any rivers or fell to any daggers, Rome was sick. By the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic was powerful, rich, and very unstable. The old system had been designed for a small city-state. Now Rome ruled much of the Mediterranean, and its politics hadn't kept up. A few key problems had been building for decades: massive inequality. Huge estates run by slave labor pushed small farmers off their land. Many ended up in Rome itself, poor and angry, dependent on handouts. Political violence reforms by the Gracchus brothers had ended with street mobs and murder. Violence was becoming a political tool. Ambitious generals, men like Marius and Sulla, discovered that if you controlled loyal soldiers, you could control the state, or at least bend it. By the time Gaius Julius Caesar was born in 100 BCE, Roman politics were already a dangerous game. He didn't create that world, he learned to survive and then dominate within it. A young man in the crossfire, Caesar, came from an old patrician family, the Iuli, who claimed divine descent from Venus through Aeneas. That sounded impressive, but in practical terms, his family wasn't particularly powerful or rich by his time. Early on, he made a choice that defined his political identity. He aligned with the players, politicians who claimed to champion the common people against the traditional aristocratic elite, the optimates. This put him at odds with Sulla, the dictator, who tried to restore senatorial control with brutal purges. Sulla ordered Caesar to divorce his wife, Cornelia, daughter of a prominent populares leader. Caesar refused. That refusal nearly cost him his life. He lost his property and had to flee Rome, living dangerously until he was eventually pardoned. It's one of those early moments that tells you something about him. He could bend when necessary, but he had a line he would not cross. He understood the power of loyalty to causes, to allies, and eventually to himself. He served in the army, distinguished himself in battle, was captured by pirates and ransomed, and famously promised to come back and crucify them, then actually did. Each of these episodes burnished his reputation for daring and charisma. Back in Rome, he began the slow climb up the cursus honorum, the ladder of offices, quaesta, aedile, praetor. He spent lavishly, deepening his debts but winning public favor with games and spectacles. Behind the charm there was cold calculation. Popularity now, power later. The first triumvirate, power in a private agreement. By the late 60s and 50s BCE, 3 men stood out in Roman politics. Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, better known as Pompey, a brilliant general, already a celebrated conqueror, craving respect from the Senate. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, eager for glory to match his fortune. Julius Caesar, rising politician, dangerously in debt, rich in charisma and ambition. Each had what the others lacked. The Senate, fearing their individual power, tried to limit them. Caesar saw an opportunity. Around 60 BCE, these 3 formed an informal alliance historians call the First Triumvirate, not an official office, but a private power pact. Pompey got his eastern settlements and land for his veterans. Crassus got favorable tax arrangements for his allies. Caesar got the political backing he needed to be elected consul in 59 BCE, and, crucially, a long-term command in Gaul afterward. As consul, Caesar pushed through land reforms and measures that shocked the conservative senators. He played rough politics, using force and intimidation when needed. After his term, he secured a proconsular command in Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum. That command, meant as a stepping stone, became the stage for his transformation. The Gallic Wars, fame, blood, and a new kind of power, from 58 to 50 BCE. Caesar waged war in Gaul, a region roughly corresponding to modern France, Belgium, and parts of neighboring areas. It's here that he truly rose. He didn't just campaign, he conquered. He defeated tribe after tribe. He crossed into Britain. He dealt with Germanic incursions. He crushed major uprisings. most famously that of Vercingetorix at Alesia. The human cost was staggering, perhaps hundreds of thousands killed, enslaved, or displaced by Roman expansion, if even part of Caesar's own figures are to be believed. Caesar's own account, Commentary de Bello Gallico, presents these campaigns as defensive and justified. Modern historians see far more political calculation because, for Caesar, Gaul was more than a battlefield. It was a recruitment tool. His soldiers became fiercely loyal to him personally, not just to Rome. It also served as a propaganda engine. His campaign reports circulated in Rome, turning him into a hero in the eyes of many citizens, not to mention a financial solution. War spoils and slaves helped solve his crippling debts, and, of course, a power base. He now commanded experienced legions who had fought with him for years. In the meantime, his alliance with Pompey and Crassus began to fray. Crassus died on campaign against the Parthians. Pompey drifted closer to the Senate and married into another powerful family after Caesar's daughter, Julia, who had been married to Pompey, died in childbirth. With Crassus gone and the family tie broken, the first triumvirate dissolved into rivalry. The Republic was too small now for two such men. The Rubicon, no turning back. By 50 BCE, Caesar's command in Gaul was ending. His enemies in the Senate, many aligned with Pompey, wanted him to give up his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar knew what awaited him: prosecution, exile, or worse. His political enemies had long memories and serious grievances. He offered compromises, proposals that he and Pompey give up their commands together, or that he be allowed to stand for consul in absentia. But under pressure from his opponents, the Senate insisted that only he lay down his arms. It was a demand that stripped away his protection but left Pompey in command. Here, the logic was simple and brutal. If Caesar returned without his army, he could be destroyed. If he refused, he risked civil war. In 49 BCE, standing by the small river Rubicon, the traditional boundary his army was not allowed to cross, Caesar made the decision that would echo through history. He crossed the Rubicon. By doing so, he committed an act of treason in the eyes of the Republican order, but one he justified as necessary to protect his dignitas, his status and honor, and the rights of the tribunes who supported him. According to later tradition, he said something like, "The die is cast," as he advanced. Whether he uttered those exact words or not, the sentiment fits. He had chosen the path that could lead only to absolute victory or complete ruin, civil war and triumph. Pompey and many senators fled Italy, believing they could regroup and use their superior resources to crush Caesar. Instead, Caesar moved quickly. He secured Italy with minimal bloodshed. He marched to Spain, neutralizing Pompey's forces there. He pursued Pompey to Greece. The decisive clash came at Pharsalus. In 48 BCE, Pompey had the larger army. Caesar had veterans and tactical genius. Caesar's forces won a crushing victory. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was murdered, ironically, by those who thought they were doing Caesar a favor. When Caesar arrived in Egypt and was presented with Pompey's severed head, he is said to have wept, whether out of genuine grief, political theater, or both. It was a moment that symbolized the end of one era of rivalry and the beginning of something more ominous. Caesar alone at the top. He still had enemies to defeat, campaigns in the East, in North Africa, and in Spain, but the outcome was increasingly clear. By 45 BCE, he had won. He now held unprecedented power, dictator for life, reformer, or monarch in disguise. With his rivals gone, Caesar assumed a series of titles and powers: dictator, first for limited terms, then eventually dictator perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity. Control over major appointments, dominating influence over the Senate. On paper, the Republic still existed. Elections were held, the Senate met, but the center of gravity had shifted. Real authority now radiated from Caesar himself. What did he do with that power? He was not idle. Caesar initiated a whirlwind of reforms. The calendar he introduced, the Julian calendar, aligning it more accurately with the solar year. With minor later adjustments, it's the model of the calendar many of us still use. Debt and economic reforms, he provided partial relief to debtors, regulated interest, and tried to stabilize the chaotic financial system. Provincial governance, he tried to curb corruption among provincial governors and integrated more provincial elites into Roman life. citizenship, and integration, he extended Roman citizenship to many communities, particularly in Gaul and Spain, further knitting the empire together. Public works, he began ambitious building projects, from temples to forums, reshaping Rome physically as well as politically. Supporters could, and still can, argue that Caesar was trying to rationalize and modernize a broken system. But there were darker notes. His image and honors edged ever closer to monarchical symbolism. Statues, laurel wreaths, and the right to sit on a golden chair in the Senate began to resemble royal trappings. His face appeared on coins during his lifetime, something Romans associated with kingship, not republican magistrates. He sometimes made decisions without proper consultation, sidelining traditional procedures. Many in the elite feared that Caesar wanted not just power, but a crown in all but name, or perhaps even in name. Whether he truly intended to found a new hereditary monarchy is still debated. What matters for his story is that enough influential Romans believed that he might. So, the conspiracy, liberators in the shadows. In 44 BCE, resentment and fear among senators reached critical mass. The conspiracy against Caesar brought together an uneasy mix. Former allies like Marcus Junius Brutus, who had personal ties and a reputation for integrity. Hardened opponents like Gaius, Cassius, Longinus, others who felt humiliated, threatened, or simply sidelined by Caesar's dominance. They called themselves liberatores, liberators of the Republic. In their minds, they were not assassins but saviors, striking down a tyrant to restore freedom. They worried that Caesar would soon leave for a grand campaign against Parthia and never again be so vulnerable. If they were going to act, it had to be soon, in Rome and in public. The chosen day was the Ides of March, March 15, 44 BCE, the fall. Ides of March. The scene is one of the most famous in history, and for once, the dramatized version is not entirely at odds with the sources. Caesar entered a meeting of the Senate in the theater of Pompey. It was a symbolic setting. He walked into a building bearing the name of his greatest rival, now dead, to preside over a Senate that had effectively lost its independence. As he took his seat, conspirators approached with a petition. Then steel flashed. They struck him again and again. Ancient sources differ on the exact number of wounds, but it was brutal and chaotic. Caesar tried to defend himself at first, then, realizing resistance was hopeless, is said to have pulled his toga over his head. The famous phrase et tu, Brute, may be more literary than historical, but the presence of Brutus among his attackers clearly stung. Whether or not he spoke any last words, he died surrounded not by foreign enemies, but by fellow Romans, many of them men he had promoted. The conspirators rushed out, proclaiming the death of the tyrant and the restoration of liberty. Instead, they had lit the fuse of something even worse. The Republic they tried to save. The liberatores had a romantic idea of how their act would be received. They expected the Senate and people to rally behind them, grateful for the removal of a would-be king. After all, Romans were raised on stories of tyrants expelled and liberty defended. But the Republic, they imagined, no longer really existed. Many ordinary Romans had benefited from Caesar's policies or admired him as a charismatic victor. His soldiers loved him. He had packed the Senate with his own appointees. His reforms, his patronage networks, and his sheer myth had sunk deep roots. Instead of a united front for liberty, Rome dissolved into confusion and fear. At Caesar's funeral, Mark Antony read his will and displayed his bloody, slashed toga. The crowd grew furious, not at the dead dictator, but at the men who killed him. Caesar had left money to the people and gifts to the city. He had also named a young relative, Gaius Octavian, as his adopted son and main heir. From this point, Caesar's story spills into another, the struggle between Antony and Octavian. More civil wars, and finally, the establishment of the Roman Empire under Augustus, Octavian's new name once he secured power. The conspirators had wanted to restore the old republic. Instead, they removed the one man who, for all his dominance, had enough authority to keep the factions in balance. In the chaos that followed, the republic finally died, not at Caesar's hand, but in the struggles after his death. Caesar's rise and fall, what remained? So what do we do with a figure like Julius Caesar? He was a skilled general whose campaigns expanded Rome's territories dramatically. A ruthless conqueror responsible for massive suffering in Gaul and beyond. a brilliant politician who understood public opinion, patronage, and spectacle. A reformer who fixed real structural problems from the calendar to provincial misrule. A breaker of constitutional norms who concentrated power in his own hands. His rise was not a simple story of one man overpowering a healthy system. He rose in a republic already weakened by inequality, violence, and the ambitions of earlier strongmen. The institutions designed for a small city-state struggled to contain an empire, and the men who commanded its armies. His fall was not a simple moral lesson about tyranny punished. His assassination did not restore the old ways. It accelerated the collapse and cleared the path for something new. One-man rule dressed in the language of tradition. The name Caesar itself became a title. Caesar in Rome, Caesar in the Greek-speaking East, Tsar in Slavic realms centuries later. Long after the man died on that Senate floor, his name lived on as shorthand for supreme power. If you close the volume on Julius Caesar and slide it back onto the shelf, the dust doesn't quite settle. His story lingers because it forces a difficult question. What happens when a system can no longer handle the pressures placed upon it, and a gifted individual steps forward, promising order, glory, and reform at the cost of the old rules? Rome answered that question in blood, and the echo of that answer has never completely gone silent.